Mr. Khrushchev rests very comfortably, and he is a modest figure insofar as size is concerned. Everyone was surprised to find him only 5 feet 5 inches tall. Nonetheless, he is striking as he walks in any column or by himself. Everyone knew the moment he entered the embassy room of the ambassador tonight that Khrushchev was in the room. He lacked his brown hat. We don't think that was the reason he failed to wave tonight as he came in. But in any event, he did not respond significantly to the applause of the 1,042 persons who had come here expensively to greet him. The coverage being provided here is not only live television, and of course it's being videotaped by many of the stations in Los Angeles for network use later on. Also, there's a great deal of film work going on. The various motion picture news services have their cameramen down on this makeshift platform, and it is a crowded site in which we nestle. We are planning later, in fact, we're withholding the introduction visually of the guests at the central table because this will be accomplished later individually by the chairman for the meeting tonight, Mr. Minkler. And in view of that, we will hold off our introduction. But as we plan to go along with him as he introduces people from right to left, we need a good deal of elbow room for our cameraman, and just offhand, I don't think we'll get it. I was just handed the menu for the ambassador tonight for this civic dinner in honor of His Excellency Nikita S. Khrushchev. He is listed on the left exclusively as chairman of the Council of Ministers of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Fair enough. But the menu is as difficult for me to read as is English for him to understand. His interpreter tonight will be the man who has been with him throughout the day, and we understand that he uses 2 interpreters during his trip. He talks so much, the word was that one interpreter is worn out by the time a day is through. There is no telling how long Mr. Khrushchev will talk tonight. We understood after conversations through hotel personnel here, they had been talking to the State Department. Oh, maybe a little brief 7-minute talk. Then there was the word, oh no, it'll be a major address. Goodness knows how long it will run. In any event, he seems to be an excellent off-the-cuff speaker, gathering material perhaps as he goes along. Material that will be denied him will be any first-hand knowledge of Disneyland, because he complained earlier today at the 20th Century Fox lot that he was not allowed to go to Disneyland. This was toward the conclusion of his main address there, and probably his remarks about Disneyland, a scene that's very close to the hearts of most Hollywood people and all persons in Los Angeles, those remarks perhaps alienated him from his audience of film luminaries more than any other, more than his talks about politics or anything else, because he chose, unfortunately, to refer to security. He started out, everyone thought, innocently enough, by saying, well, he couldn't go to Disneyland. What's the matter out there? Have a big attack of cholera? And up to that point, it was humorous, everyone recognizing that he was the reason he couldn't be allowed out there. And then he went on into a lengthy harangue on the fact that security could not be provided him. And from that point on, Hollywood probably felt the man was falling in its disfavor. He doesn't seem to recognize, or at least will not allow, that one of the reasons
this mic here
doesn't mean a thing. Toast, because the speeches, the actual presentation of Mr. Khrushchev is a whole dessert yet away. There again we had an example of just the smattering of applause that's being accorded Mr. Khrushchev as he continues his tour in the United States. Undoubtedly he resents it, and probably too it makes him even more determined as he goes through the evening to make his points on Americans. We, to a degree, are making him perhaps as angry as he is making us on some occasions. Crowds in Los Angeles have mounted, actually, no matter how casual or nonchalant we wish to be about the guests in our midst. And there was quite a crowd along the expected routes taken by him earlier today from the airport on to 20th Century Fox. Then there was no knowledge at all of just how he would get on out to the San Fernando Valley. And after the showing of the can-can sequences to him and Mrs. Khrushchev, he did depart 20th Century finally, and we understand went on over the Santa Monica Mountains into the valley, but he did not stop where he was expected to, and therefore crowds couldn't really form as one could suppose they might. But tonight, it was well known that he would be arriving at the Ambassador. Nobody knew just when, if he would dawdle out in the valley or what time he would arrive. But Wilshire Boulevard, particularly as it gets close to the entrances to the Ambassador, jam-packed tonight prior to 7 o'clock, prior to the time Mr. Khrushchev finally first checked in to his hotel room here. And it became common knowledge that some of the spectators had carried some signs with them. And naturally, the signs were confiscated by the police, and a captain of West LA Police remarked, he acknowledged in his interview on television, yes, we took the signs, and we are minutely examining them now. We don't know how long this minute examination will take. The inference we could draw that naturally the signs would be returned, but only after Khrushchev safely had passed, so we did not have to see those signs. Well, the captain, because of his rank, naturally didn't have to personally confiscate the signs. They were taken up by an officer on the force. Later, the officer himself was interviewed. Oh, and he disclaimed any knowledge at all about those signs were picked up, and he certainly was not the person involved. There is a great deal of hubbub here tonight, and most of it is in English. There's some Russian being spoken throughout the room, and it's always a surprise, despite the fact we know Russians are present, it's always a surprise to hear it being spoken. And when you walk by one or two persons or more talking in Russian, naturally you stop and turn around and look at them. Luckily, up here on our news platform, English spoken here exclusively. Although I imagine there are Russian photographers up here. Dirk, can you do you imagine some of these newsmen here are Russians, or do they have their own private setups of any other nationality when they are abroad? (9:41) and all is well in the embassy room of the Hotel Ambassador, except we're exactly that many minutes late, 41 minutes late for the introduction of the Russian premier. I feel guilty as the camera scans the persons who are seated here and not identifying them for you, except it would take the play away from the persons who later will introduce them more formally to you, and because it would be so unfair, then we simply will evade that. Probably by now, all of the faces we see on the screen are readily identifiable. I'm very happy that covers, we see on the left side of the screen there, persons shielding their faces. Ah, here we go. This is Walter Combs now talking with Mr. Minkler, who's at the left of the chairman, and perhaps readying the schedule for the minutes ahead. The warmer it gets for them up there under our lights, the better off we are. That's Mr. Minkler, and in just a few minutes we'll be introducing him, and from then on out it'll be his evening. He is the chairman for this night. He is the man who is the president of the Los Angeles World Affairs Council. He's almost being brought out of retirement here insofar as such public appearances are concerned, because he's been extremely retiring and normally allows Walter Combs, the executive director, to make many of the public appearances on behalf of the World Affairs Council. There's been speculation as to how well the Khrushchev trip is being covered, and some newsmen who are traveling with the Premier suggest that probably the coverage, all the gear, equipment, personnel, and attention, concern lavished upon the project, probably more extensive than any of the national conventions by any of the parties. On our news platform here are personnel from almost all of the stations and networks in Los Angeles, all making their own plans for their coverage by their individual stations, their interpretations and remarks that they'll be called upon to make later. Well, he's not getting a tan under our lights, but he is becoming warm. However, he is patient until one says something about communism or socialism or democracy. That he cannot stand. There are practically no film personalities here tonight. As we looked about the room after it was filled and also as it was being filled, persons filing in very slowly, one had a chance to look almost every person over individually. I didn't see a single film person coming by. Of course, their day was earlier. They were out at the lunch at 20th Century Fox, 400 strong, and probably felt they made their contribution to the event at that time. The waiters are hurrying along. They're doing a remarkable job. They have a lengthy menu to serve, and they're getting it off in good time. The kitchen, of course, is prepared for crowds 1,042 or larger. Actually, it's more than 1,042. They've had, 32 more persons. It'll be 1,074. And very casually, before we signed on, they brought down all of the news. A great feather in their cap. However, it cannot be said that they took this affair entirely in stride, because naturally we've been in quite close contact with the ambassador people since we were concerned with the pooled television coverage for this event. And the conversations with them indicated that insofar as this event was concerned, the stay of this man at their hotel, they had no idea what was going on. Never before in their professional career as hotel people had they been so intimately associated with so much security and concern for detail. But they met the bill in every essence. I have been trying to avoid for the last 30 minutes the notes that constantly come up to our desk about people with transistor radios in the crowd. Ah, here we come. Transistor radios who are listening, we imagine, to the Dodger game. But in any event, sure enough, they are. This is obviously something special brought in, and if I had a better educational background, I could look at the dishes, the trays these waiters are carrying, and recognize immediately what is being brought in. Rebut earlier remarks made on behalf of democracy or about history, and to which he has taken offense. And possibly it is a genuine feeling within him. Possibly, on the other hand, he feels that he is a victim of his own system, and he knows perfectly well that all of his remarks are being recorded by his own journalists and people of his own government, and he could not maybe afford to return back to Moscow and be asked by his fellow countrymen and certainly other officers in government, well, now, Mr. Khrushchev, why did you not respond to such and such? So maybe that is the reason he is always so anxious to make the record perfectly clear on behalf of his cause. Now, we understand that the food being brought in on these trays now is of the same general family as baked Alaska. The baked Alaska is a typical fare that has been served him in the past. We recall hearing that term frequently since Mr. Khrushchev arrived. Ice cream cake, little ladyfingers, and so on. There have been still photographs of Mr. Khrushchev that have appeared in newspapers, and the captions beneath or along the side would say, well, there he is digging into this and eating that heartily. Actually, he eats like a sparrow. Doesn't do too much. We don't know who that lady is. But someone with his wits about him probably should find out. Well, one thing can be sure, she would not be standing there if she were not confident that was the finest fashion that money could buy. She surprised everybody. Autograph requested of Khrushchev. Certainly at this dinner tonight, I don't know how things were in the reception earlier. I don't know if anyone presumed upon him for his signature on a menu or card. I don't recall anywhere in watching the television coverage since he arrived on Tuesday that anybody came up to him for any request for a signature. But that lady apparently did. Anybody know who she is? She will go down in fame. Well, he's writing all sorts of things. We doubt those are notes he's scribbling for his speech. That lady perhaps started a trend in requests for signatures, autographs of the premier. Well, we don't know what's happened to security, but it must have just shattered because the man standing almost directly behind the premier, the short man, left center, screen is a chief engineer. I trust that he is up there to check on audio arrangements. which apparently have been questionable from the standpoint of the House PA system in the past 50 minutes. That is how late we are. For any station that might be with us live, we apologize for the debacle that must have developed insofar as their schedule is concerned for the balance of the evening. This is perhaps by far the most informal gathering that Mr. Khrushchev has attended since its arrival here. The inclination now among knowing people apparently is to refer to him as Mr. Chairman. And at first, when President Eisenhower was overheard talking about Chairman Khrushchev, everyone wondered at the outset, well, has the president made a mistake and not called him Premier? But no, apparently he prefers being known by the title which is Chairman of the Council of Ministers over in his own Soviet Union. Possibly that's a better title than Premier or Prime Minister, although he himself enjoyed calling himself today Prime Minister, and he made frequent reference to this at 20th Century Fox as he scorned Spiros Skouras' lowly attempts to become no more than the head of a film studio when he, Khrushchev, aspired to the top red job in the world and made it. Podium. That's one of the most welcome sights all night. Ambassador Lodge perhaps concerned about the tardiness in the schedule, just talking a moment ago with Mr. Combs, who has a measure of responsibility for the schedule. Yes, there is confirmation that the lady who had her back to us a moment ago talking with Mr. Khrushchev was indeed getting an autograph. We don't have her name yet. Probably the security agents do. No, we doubt that. In stating at the outset what seemed an eternity ago that we had a chance to talk with Mrs. Khrushchev prior to going on the air, we did not wish that to appear as if we were name droppers or had access to any point in the room. Rather, it's so easy to get up there, and as a part of making some of our pre-broadcast arrangements, she was right there, and it would have been a snub not to have remarked on something. Her dress is gray, and it has some sort of a needlework in it. It looks like